Good morning, ladies and gentlemen and students. Congratulations and wishes on Constitutional Day. And it has just come appropriate to celebrate this particular event with none other than Professor Sandeep Shastri. And Sir has consented to, because this semester we also have this course on Indian politics and government. It also falls appropriate into that domain. And I've known Sir for quite some time. And so when I requested, he agreed to deliver this particular lecture. Sir, on behalf of Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, Manipal Academy of Higher Education, and before I hand over the mic to you, let me introduce you to the audience, because this audience is not from absolute political science background, so they need a bit of introduction about you. So Dr. Sandeep Shastri is currently the Vice Chancellor of Jagan Lake City University, Bhopal. With close to 4 decades of experience in the fields of research and teaching, Dr. Shastri is a political scientist who has been the Pro-Vice Chancellor of Jain, deemed to be university like that of ours, for over a decade, Director of the Research and Training Wing of the Jain Group of Institutions for 5 years, and a faculty in the Department of Political Science at Bangalore University for 2 decades. His research has largely been in the field of electoral studies, federalism, political processes and institutions, and the teaching learning process. He is the co-chair of the research committee of the International Political Science Association that focuses on public opinion research. He is the national coordinator of the Lok Niti Network, an all India network of the social scientists involved in survey-based election and opinion studies. Dr. Shastri has authored over 13 books, more than 50 chapters in edited books, and more than 100 articles in reputed research journals. As a political commentator, he has written more than 350 articles in English, Kannada, and Hindi in renowned newspapers and online portals. He is an election and political analyst for India TV, India Today TV, and appears frequently on CNBC, News 18, and Republic TV. Dr. Shastri is a consultant to the UNDP and was involved in their political party reforms project in the Pacific Rim countries. He's been a consultant to the World Bank for its governance reforms project in Nepal. He's a senior advisor to the Forum of Federations and its lead consultant on political transition in Myanmar, constitutional reforms in South Sudan and federal processes in Sudan. Dr. Shastri has lectured at universities in over 50 countries in all the 6 inhabited continents. In his career, he has been a South-South Foundation Fellow, Salzburg Seminar Fellow, Indo-Canadian Fellow, International Visitor Program Fellow of the United States. Dr. Shastri was privileged to play a key role in drafting Karnataka's youth policy by serving as the chairman of the drafting committee of the said policy. Dr. Shastri prefers to describe himself as a teacher by instinct, researcher by choice, trainer by passion, and above all, a lifelong learner. A hearty welcome to you once again, sir. Now over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Nandakishore, for that very, very warm welcome. You just didn't read out from a script. I thought it came out, and it is wonderful to listen to somebody introducing you with so much of passion and feeling, and it makes one feel good as one starts this session. It's a delight to touch base with young people at the Manipal Academy for Higher Education. This is an institution I have known for many years now and greatly respected the work you do and the wonderful learners that you have at that institution. I always believe it's the student community at any institution which are the heartbeat of that institution. And therefore, I'm delighted to interact with this very, very young set of academic professionals on this very, very important and what I would term for myself a very interesting theme. Dr. Nandakishore and I decided that we should title the presentation as The State of Democracy in India and the Role of Political Parties in this country in shaping the Indian democratic experiment. So that would be the focus of what I would discuss with you today. My plan is not to take more than half an hour to say what I want to say. I don't know if people's eyes popped out when I said half an hour, whether it was too much or too less. I hope you thought it is too less. And I will talk for half an hour and leave the remaining half an hour for any questions, queries, comments that you may have. And I know from my past experience of Manipal that students have a lot of questions and a lot of queries. So all of you have a reputation to live up to of raising a lot of questions and queries as part of the presentation I will make now in front of each of you. Now, I have a PowerPoint slide which I use just to try and navigate the points I want to make. I want this discussion more to, and I would like to use the PowerPoint slide just incidentally to be able to make the point, highlight issue I would like to raise. And raise. Now, let me start the sharing of my screen. The first, I would like to look at politics, political parties in India from the prism of democracy. And I'm going to talk about 4 things as part of that dialogue today.
Still not visible.
What does the idea of democracy mean in India? We are talking of the Constitution, we are talking of this Constitution Day. What is the idea? What is the design of that democracy which our Constitution provided us? In 75 years now, what has been the outcomes of that democracy? And finally, what are the challenges that we as a democracy face? And when addressing all these 4, the idea, the design, the outcome, and the challenges, I'm going to look at it from the prism of political party. Now, if you look at the emerging conversation on Indian democracy, I would say 7+ decades now, there are certain things we can be extremely proud about. I think, number 1, we have seen the deepening of the democratic process. I think compared to 1950s when we gained independence, if you come to today, there is undoubtedly a deepening of the democratic process. By deepening of the democratic process, I mean democratic processes in India gaining deeper roots. We have seen in India the frequent change of government. Of course, the question arises, do we really have that meaningful choice? Like if you look at the state you all live in, if you look at Karnataka, since 1989, and I'm talking therefore of as long as the last 32 years. For the last 32 years in Karnataka, we have not elected back a government. Since 1989, we have not elected a government. Does this symbolize in important ways the deepening of democracy? We have had peaceful transitions of power, unlike what we saw in the United States earlier this year. We have seen peaceful transitions of power. So what does that speak of for the deepening of Indian democracy is a question that I would like to raise with each of you. The second point I would raise on this is the fact that not only do you have the deepening of democracy you have more intense electoral competition today. Today, I don't think any party can say with a degree of sureness that we are going to win a particular election. I remember reading somewhere that in the 1950s, the Congress party had a slogan, which was a very arrogant slogan. The slogan read, vote for the opposition if you can find the opposition. Vote for the opposition if you can find that opposition. It was like saying that you have no choice but to elect us. But today we seem to have more intense electoral competitions. We have expanded the democratic space, by which I mean social groups which were earlier not very active in elections are today becoming very active in elections. Underprivileged social and economic groups are today becoming important as voters, and leaders from these groups are emerging. Let me come to my fourth point, friends, and this could be a point of important debate about Indian democracy. Are we seeing in the recent past the assertion of state rights in our federal process? And let me spend a moment discussing this particular point. What do I mean by assertion of state rights? We often say in India, we see a festival of elections. Like when Dasara gets over, Diwali comes. When Diwali gets over, Christmas comes. When Christmas gets over, New Year comes. When New Year gets over, Sankranti comes. Now, Indian elections are something like that. We very recently had an election in West Bengal and Kerala and Assam. And now immediately we are talking of elections in Uttar Pradesh, Punjab, and other states. And then we will talk of elections in Karnataka. Then we will talk of elections in Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan. No, the larger point I'm making is state elections are becoming as important as a national elections. And I want you to think about this. Is a national election also a sum total of elections of 28 different states? Do we really see a national trend across the 28 states of India? If you look at recent elections, I don't think you have seen such a national trend. In 2004, when Atal Bihari Vajpayee was defeated as Prime Minister and his party was defeated, I remember Vajpayee ji made a speech where he said, and he said it in Hindi, so I will say it in Hindi first and then translate it. He said, "Jo jeete unhe aaj bhi malum nahi wo kyun jeete, jo haare unhe aaj bhi malum nahi wo kyun haare." Those who won did not know why they won. Those who lost did not know how they lost. Because everybody thought Vajpayee and the BJP will come back to power, and they did not. We at Lokniti had a very simple explanation for that. We said, if you look at the results of a few states of India, if you look at the results of Uttar Pradesh, if you look at the results of Andhra Pradesh, then it was Andhra Pradesh, one state. And if you look at the results of Maharashtra, you can explain how the NDA's seats fell and why the NDA lost the election. Let's also remember our current Prime Minister is the first Prime Minister who was made the prime ministerial candidate by the party even as he was the sitting chief minister of a state. Mr. Modi was chief minister of Gujarat when the BJP announced him as their prime ministerial candidate. We have had prime ministers in the past who have been chief ministers before. But to the best of my understanding, this is the first example of a party declaring a prime ministerial candidate being a sitting chief minister of a state. And let's remember, Mr. Modi led the BJP in the 2014 campaign as chief minister of Gujarat. They won the election as him being the chief minister of Gujarat. And only after that, he resigned as chief minister of Gujarat to be able to be elected as the leader of the BJP parliamentary party. Now, this is what I mean, friends, by saying that we are a polity where state rights, where the rights of the state seem to be at the center stage. That is the implication. That is the wider point that I'm trying to make. I'm also trying to make the point, and I'll put up my slide in a moment. We have, I think, in India very clearly transformed ourselves from a one-party dominant system to a clear competitive multi-party system. Of course, there is a debate that has started in India now as to whether we have a BJP dominant system. I'm not too sure whether that debate is a debate in the right direction. But I would say, for me, and finally, the greater visibility of civil society organizations, non-party organizations in the public space. I think you need no better example than the farmers' agitation that you had in the country, or that you continue to have in the country, which has consciously said that we are not associated with any single political party. How they did not allow any single political party to put up their banners at the time of the revolt or of the protests that they were having. Let me take this discussion for friends, and let me now focus attention on what I would call where the challenges seem to lie, or where the problems today seem to lie. And let me just highlight what I would see as the critical problems. The critical problems for me, as I see it, are, and I'll put up all the problems together so that we can reflect on them together. For me, challenge number one in Indian democracy is the difference between our idea of democracy and the imagination of democracy. And let me dwell at length as to what do I mean by it. If you ask people in India, do you want India to be a democracy? You will have an overwhelming response saying, yes, 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 India must be a democracy. So the idea of democracy is extremely strongly rooted in this country. But can we say that the imagination of that democracy is equally strong and widespread? Is our imagination of democracy as robust as our idea of democracy? My second point, are the outcomes that we are experiencing in our democracy much more a discussion about mere processes than about results? Are we talking more of processes being in place rather than the outcomes that those processes should produce? And today, given the deep polarizations we are witnessing in society, where we seem to be dividing society into we and they, and not really talking of us. You go to television debates, you go to social media, it's always about we and they. It's always about those who talk from my perspective and those who talk from your perspective. I recently had a huge challenge, and I won't name it. I had a recent challenge with a television channel because they wanted me on their show, and I said, I will come. But before the show, they said, sir, can you tell us do you support this issue or do you oppose this issue? I said, look, I want to discuss the issue and neither support nor oppose the issue. Sir, that is a problem because we have to put a placard against your name as to whether you support it or oppose it. I said, look, you cannot put a placard against my name that I support it or oppose it because I am going to debate on issues. So they also said they can't put me in the center because the anchor sits in the center. So then I said, I leave it to you to decide. So they decided to give me a label, and to their shock and amazement, I actually took a stand which was opposite what their label took, and then they decided to change the label halfway down the program. What am I driving at, friends? We are a society today, and this raises questions about our democracy. We are a society today which has very, very, very deep polarization. By which I mean, and I don't know if Dr. Nandakishore will agree with me on this, today we have a conclusion and then we draw data to support our conclusion. We don't look at data to tell us what the conclusion should be, but I already have a conclusion drawn and then I search for data to support that conclusion. This is the deep polarization I am talking about. And let me quickly talk about the last 2 points I have on this particular slide. And those last 2 points that I have is about what many friends like Ram Guha have said. Have we become an election-only democracy? Have we become a democracy where the only window that is open and the only window which is bright and the only window from which sunshine seems to come in is the window of elections? Have the other windows of democracy shut down is the question that I'd like to raise. Have we limited our democracy to be a mere election only democracy is the question that I'd like to raise. Now, let me take the discussion forward and let me at this stage raise 2 points. I'm going to now shift gear to look at political parties, and I'm going to share with you the findings of an important study. Dr. Nandakishore, when introducing me, made the point that my research is largely linked to Lokniti, and all of us do survey-based analysis of public attitudes. So I want to share with you now a data point which flows from a particular study that we have done, which is part of what is called the Asian Barometer Survey. Now, on this slide, you will notice the level of trust that citizens have in political parties. Do you have great deal of trust, or do you have somewhat some trust in political parties? And friends, look at the percentages across Asia, and you will find India somewhere in the middle there. You will find that India is at 37% of great deal and somewhat trust in parties, which means a little more than 1/3 of the people in the country have great deal and somewhat trust in political parties. 2/3 of people do not have trust in political parties. And if you could add a point, when you look at people's trust in public institutions, political parties and police in India compete for being at the lowest position. Now, I'm not talking of the highest position. Political parties and the police compete to be at the lowest position. Now, but there is a larger story that comes in this slide, which is countries which you see on the right side of the slide are countries which do not have the most robust democratic processes, and countries which you see on the left side of the slide where the trust in political parties is much less, those countries seem to have much lower trust in political parties. So what is the lesson? What is the lesson that we could learn with regard to the lack of trust in political parties in democracies? Now, for that, I will now necessarily move to my next slide, which raises certain questions. And I do hope those questions will trigger off certain certain queries in your mind on the working of political parties in India. And what are the questions that I'd like to raise? Let me put the questions up. What are the implications of the low trust in political parties among citizens in India? Number one, our data clearly shows that trust in political parties is linked to the level of satisfaction with the working of democracy. While in India, a lot of people overwhelmingly would say India should be a democracy, when you ask them, how has this democracy been functioning? The satisfaction with that democracy does not meet the expectations. That's the point I was making in the last slide. The gap between expectation and experience, aspiration and achievement, rhetoric and reality. Do we see this yawning gap between the expectation and the experience? I'm coming to another point. This is what I want you to think about. Does this reduced trust in political parties in India announce the arrival of the critical citizen? You can change Asia for India. Does this announce the arrival of the critical citizen? What do I mean by these 3 points? By critical citizen, I mean the citizen as a voter in Indian democracy has heightened levels of expectations from the state and from political parties. There is a healthy skepticism about those in power. There is a health. Now, if you don't trust political parties as much as people would like you to, is it about a healthy skepticism about political parties? That you are on probation, you are on guard, we are watching you. Once in 5 years, we will review your performance. So does this lack of trust in political parties involve a healthy skepticism about those entrusted with power? And finally, I raise the question, does it symbolize a yawning gap between a promise overload and a performance deficit? This promise overload and performance deficit, I will try to address in terms of 2 points. Some years ago, Arvind Kejriwal said, if I fulfill 30% of my promises, it is enough to come back to power. I need not fulfill, what he said unsaid was, I need not fulfill 70% of my promises. When the NDA announced in 2014, good days are coming, achhe din, good days are coming, and they were voted to power with a majority. A ruling party gets a majority after 25 years. And people said, good days are coming. I jokingly say, in 2019, people said good days are coming in 2 ways. They either said it with an exclamation mark or with a question mark. If you said good days are coming with an exclamation mark, which means you are a supporter of the BJP and NDA. And if you said good days are coming with a question mark, you are asking, when are those good days coming? Where are those good days coming? For whom all are those good days coming? A supporter of the BJP would say, in 5 years, you want the good days to come, whereas 50 years you tolerated the Congress party. Promise overload, expectation deficit. I remember an important leader in an interview telling me, I won't name the leader. In an interview, an important leader told me, and I will say what he said in Hindi, हमारा नियत साफ लगना चाहिए. And those of you who understand Hindi would understand what it means. हमारा नियत साफ लगना चाहिए, which means in public perception, our intentions should look very good. Intentions are more important. In public perception, our intentions should look very good. So friends, my question is this the dilemma of Indian democracy? Is this the dilemma of our approach to political parties? Now, this is the question that I would like to raise with all of you. Let me come to the conclusion of what I want to say, because I promised to stop in half an hour, and I will do that in another 5 minutes. I would want to raise 3 things with you now. Sorry, I would like to raise 4 things with you. Number one, I think there is enough empirical evidence to show today that mobilizing voters in a democracy on economic conditions is a huge challenge. Garnering support by political parties for the purpose, using economic yardsticks has become a huge challenge. Let me elaborate on that in 1 or 2 sentences. If you ask voters, what is the biggest problem facing the country? I don't give you any marks for guessing what is the right answer. Unemployment, price rise, economic hardship figure at the top. Irrespective of your individual economic status, you will mention these 3. Unemployment, price rise, economic hardships. How has the government done in the last 5 years? If you ask them, you will not have any very, very high rating for a government on economic performance. So what would you expect? Not have a high rating on economic performance. Common sense would tell you that these voters will vote out that government. But when that voter goes into the voting booths and looks at that EVM in front of her, in front of him, and presses the button, I'm increasingly getting convinced that what is the biggest problem they face in life does not decide which button they are going to press there. Which is the biggest problem they face in life does not define their electoral choice in an election. Now, that's the wider point I want to make when I say that it's difficult to believe that economic factors, in a sense, or economic conditions, in a sense, are a way of mobilizing voters in an election. What's the next point that I would like to stress? The next point I would like to stress. Not of the democratic process in India. Again, what do I mean by this? You look at data for the last 25 years in India. Who are the ones who vote? Who are the ones who don't vote? The richer you are, the more educated you are, the more urbane you are, the less likely you are to vote. The less economically well off you are, the less educated you are, the more rural you are, the more likely you are to. And this is diametrically opposite of Western democracies. If you look at Indian democracy, the less personally, less. I think the more well off, the more educated. Now, let me take an example to prove my point. You tell me what that example. You may remember that around important voting dates in Karnataka, we had holidays. There was a series of holidays before and after voting day. So my students then decided to do a small survey. At the start of that holiday before the day of voting, we went to three places: airports, railway stations, and bus stands to interview people. What did we find? In airports, we found that families were getting ready to travel on a holiday. And when my students asked those families, you are going out on a holiday, what about voting? They said, no, 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 no. We have got a break. We want to go on a holiday. When we went to the railway station, we found a similar story in reserved compartments. When we went to unreserved compartments of the train, and when we went to bus stands, we had people saying that they are going back home in order to vote at home because we continue to be voters in our homes. So we are using this holiday to go back to our homes. I don't know what you would draw as inferences from this. I am happy to debate that point as part of the Q&A session that you may have. But then the larger point I'm making is, if Indian democracy faces a deficit in participation, it is of the more educated and the more wealthy sections of society who sometimes are cynical in saying that the whole system is corrupt. Why should we go and vote? What is the benefit for us in going and voting? I also would make weakness of accountability mechanisms that for deviation. I think no political come to power when a party comes to power, and whichever the party is that comes to power, are they more interested in capturing the resources of the state and distributing the resources of that state to their beneficiaries? Do we continue to see patronage politics irrespective of which party comes to power? Does that contribute to the shallowness of Indian democracy? And my middle point there, whom do representatives actually represent? Whom do representatives in India actually represent? When we elect a member to parliament or elect a member to the legislative assembly, we expect them to represent us there. But what have we found in studies we have done? More than half are members of parliament from Karnataka. More than half of them rarely speak on the floor of the House. Very few among them actively participate in the deliberations of the House. Now, their counterpoint is, we were not elected to participate in the House. We were elected to solve the problems of the people. We were elected to cater to our constituency. We don't, and one of them very clearly said, we don't get votes because of the number of times we speak in the Lok Sabha. Now, this raises a question. When political parties send their representatives to elected bodies, what are the factors they keep in mind? Karnataka is now having a legislative council elections from the local bodies. And it's horrifying to see the factors on which the candidates are chosen. Ideally, it should have been people who have participated in local government who are elected to the council. But I don't see a single candidate who fulfills that requirement. So I am asking the uncomfortable question as to who did representatives represent. So I will close with my final slide, which will take me a minute to complete. I'll close with this final slide, which I'm trying to put up now for everybody's benefit, because this final slide raises three important questions. Is the challenge of Indian democracy a promise overload and a performance deficit? And would much of that blame go on political parties and their representatives? That you see a promise overload on their part, followed by a performance deficit. But yet, and secondly, we notice a deep, deep divide in society where we don't debate issues, but standpoints which then we go ahead to try and defend. But I think the saving grace for us is the citizen of India has still faith in the fact of a possible. The citizen still has that faith that democracy will deliver. The citizen has that faith that the democratic process will deliver what it has promised me. I will stop here. I promised to take 30 minutes. I think I stretched it by 7-8 minutes. But I'll be happy to respond to any questions that friends may have on the range of issues that I have raised as part of my presentation. Thank you so much. Much from me, and I was able to take the class, but I'm now happy to respond to any questions that friends may have.
Sure, sir. Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful lecture. I think you raised very pertinent issues with regard to Indian democracy and the type of response from the political parties, because for the survival of the democracy also, the role of political parties is extremely crucial, and how they conduct also is reflected at the international level. Now I open the floor for questions. You can introduce yourself and then you can ask the question to Dr. Shastri.
Good afternoon, sir. Myself, Harsha, and I'm a first year student of the DJIR. And it was indeed insightful to have your lecture today. So, my question is over the past 7 big decades in the Indian society, there's always a notion in the Indian society that more the educated and well-off class of the society is always tend to depend less on political parties and on the election also. So, Mark, when compared with the middle class or below the middle class citizens. So, according to your experience, do you observe this notion as a very normal or negligible? And is it a high time that we should see a change in this? Thank you, sir.
Great question. Wonderful question. One or how?
Sir, should you want to take maybe a couple of questions together and then answer?
I can take it individually and respond to it as quickly as I can.
Okay, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
First question, great question. One of my friends describes the affluent and educated sections of our society in one wonderful sentence. They love democracy, they hate politics. Their slogan is, we love democracy, but we hate this politics. My question is it a very to get their job done and therefore do not require the political process to solve their problem? They have the money power, they have the influence power, and therefore they don't require elected representatives. The poorer segments of our society cannot get those basic things they are looking for in life without the support of the government, without the support of the political process. For me, this is an important explanation. And just to expand on the point that was made, was that Anand who asked the question? Just to expand on the point that Anand made. Many years ago, and I won't refer to the locality, many years ago in Bangalore, there was a particular polling booth. There was a particular polling booth which had, believe it or not, 8% vote, which means 92% of people in that polling booth did not go in. Not surprisingly, this booth had the highest percentage of educated and well-off people. We decided to do a survey there. Next day, the day we got to know the voter turnout there, we decided to do a survey there, and we spread ourselves out across that constituency. Now, when people knew, when we walked up to people to ask them a question, the first thing they did is they put their hands behind them, because nobody wanted to show us the finger as to whether they had voted or not. Now, those who were bold enough to tell us they had not voted, we asked them, why did you not vote? Why did you not? You know what their answer was? This whole system is corrupt. All political parties parties are corrupt. That's why I did not. Then we asked them a second question. Who are the candidates in your constituency? Who are candidates in your constituency? The person sheepishly looked at us and said, I don't know who the candidates were, but all of them are corrupt. And therefore I did not. So friends, what is the mask that I have? I know many of you are wearing masks now, and it's new. Is that a wonderful mask to wear? Is that a wonderful mask to wear to hide your own indifference? What do I benefit by going and voting? I will excuse and say everybody is corrupt, nobody is good, therefore I don't want to go in. So I agree with you. I think unless the thinking sections of society decide to believe that we are going to be part of change in the way electoral politics happens in this country. So I hope this is not too elaborate an answer to your very simple question.
Yeah.
You're not incoming video. Start right.
Good afternoon, sir. It was a very wonderful lecture. Sir, I have a question on the point where you mentioned that the political parties in India run by the principle to show that their intentions are right. But then again, the thought that came to my mind was we have seen there are multiple cases where the political parties actually go and they represent, candidates with a criminal record, and they also end up becoming a representative. So how is that not affecting, their image or their intentions in the eyes of people? And like, what is the driving force which has actually sustained the criminalization of politics in our country till date? Thank you, sir.
I'm sorry I got disconnected. The only thing I heard was criminalization of politics. Would you just quickly repeat your question for me, please?
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, like, till date, we have seen that there are, as you mentioned, that the parties in India run by the principle of putting their intentions as right to the people. But on the other hand, we also see them, just nominating candidates with a criminal record, and they also end up winning elections and then coming to power. So what is it that is driving people also to vote for those candidates? And again, on the part of parties also, what is this, hypocrisy on their part and the sustenance of criminalization of politics in the country till date?
Your name?
So my name is Priyanka.
Priyanka, this is a very, very insightful question, and I don't have a ready-made answer for that. What I would offer is possibly 3-4 different explanations. Criminalization of politics or politicization of criminals, I don't know which one is true. Are we seeing the greater entry of criminals into politics? If you look at the data that the candidates of top political parties have a not very distinguished record in terms of the police cases against them. Still they are elected. Does it mean in a sense an insulation of the voter and the insensitivity of the voter on questions of criminalization?
Any other questions?
Do we accept political?
Sir, I think you should try turning off your video. So I think the bandwidth is low on your side, sir. So your voice is breaking. Might have got disconnected.
Friends, I was disconnected for a while.
Yes, sir. Sir, you turn off your video, only use the audio, sir. I think your bandwidth is comparatively low, so it's obstructing. Your voice is breaking. So now it's okay. I think you can turn off the video, sir. That should be better.
Oh,
Yes, sir. Go ahead, sir.
right. What I was saying is, yes, you do the greater presence of criminals or those with a criminal background in politics. Does it reflect an insensitivity in society towards people from the criminal background? And I'm going to raise a larger uncomfortable question, which is this collapse of values something that you see in politics alone? Or does politics mirror society? Now, this is a mirror we need to hold to ourselves and ask this question. Does politics mirror society? If you have less of values in politics in terms of allowing criminals in, is that with all professions? Do you see that in the medical profession? Do you see that in the legal profession? Do you see that in the construction profession? Do you see that in the teaching profession? Do you see that in the student profession? Is my question. I'm trying to wish away, or I'm not trying to say that this is a phenomenon we cannot check. We must fight criminalization in politics. But I want to underscore the point that criminalization is not just in politics. Criminalization is something that I see much more widespread across society. Why criminalization in politics? I don't think it's a battle in politics. It reflects a larger in society as a whole.
Still got locked out again. Sir, are you there?
I'm very much there. I'm very much there.
Okay. Sir. Next question. Yeah, Shruti, come fast. You can also come together. Ask both the questions together. Okay.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Gargi, a second year student at the department. My question is, today we witness an increased level of politicization of issues, whether it be college level student body elections or even national security for that matter. The youth hence at times gets influenced by a narrative rather than having a nationalistic perception. So to cut it short, when and how will our democracy be nationalistic and not have a politically driven mindset? Thank you.
So there's other question as well. You can take them together.
Good afternoon, sir. I have two questions. My first question is there any possibility in India where we can have psephology as a leading academic course and the scope of it? Yeah. And my second question is, since you spoke
Whether
about
we can have psephology
as a leading academic course. My second question is, since you spoke about promises overloaded and performance deficit, what I think is that in India, all of the politicians sees that politics as a business rather than a service. So what's your comment on that?
Sir, you can answer these questions, sir.
I missed out your name.
Her name is Shruti. The first one who asked question is Gargi.
I missed out the name of the second person.
Shruti. Her name is Shruti, sir.
First was Gargi, the second?
Gargi. Shruti.
Okay. Okay. Nandakishore, in a lighter vein, I would say, if Gargi had her way, both of us would lose our jobs. I'm saying in a lighter vein that if Gargi had her way, both of us would lose our jobs. Gargi, I understand the spirit with which your question was asked. But then this leads us to something else. What is politics all about? When you tell your friend in the corridor of the canteen, don't play politics, yaar, that's not the politics that Nandakishore and I talk about in our classrooms. Politics is a way by which decision making happens in a society. If you go by the original definition of politics, it is the authoritative allocation of values in a society. It is an authoritative way, or by authoritative, it means a legal way by which we decide in a society who gets what, why, and how much. So, Gargi, I would request you and others who think similarly that politicization is not bad. The type of politicization we may be witnessing is bad, but politicization per se is something integral to human life. We are looking at cleansing politics and not throwing away politics. Now, if you are giving a baby a bath and the bath water gets dirty, you don't throw the baby away with the bath water. You only change the bath water. So my appeal is, let's remember that politicization is about debate of ideas. Politicization is about multiple narratives that we think about. And Gargi, one of the narratives is about nationalism. What you raised about nationalism, patriotism, love for the country. But Gargi, my question is, how do I demonstrate my love for my country? Is it only for a behavior? Or is my love for my country demonstrated by the way, not how I speak, but how I act? Do you give somebody a badge of patriotism and say you are patriotic and you are not patriotic. Who defines who is patriotic? Who defines who is not patriotic? Today, we have multiple ideas of India competing with each other. This is the point I was making, Gargi. We have unfortunately divided our society into we and they. And the moment you divide the society into we and they, now think about it, agree with it, you will forward it to all people who think like you, right? If you don't agree with it, you will immediately delete it and forget about it. So what does social media do? Social media allows us to communicate between people who think very much like us. This is for journalism students, a question I'm raising. That social media does not change attitudes, it only confirms attitudes. Because what do we do with a message that I like? Forward it to whom? To those like me. And I don't like the message, I immediately delete it and forget about it. So Gargi, for me, politicization is important for ideas to actually be debated. Politicization is not about calling people names that you are this and you are that. Politicization is about having a platform where you can present your views without anybody putting you in a slot for what you said. Now coming to Shruti's question. Shruti, today psephology is emerging as a very, very, very important branch of academic studies in political science. We at Lokniti actually conduct every year a 15-day residential workshop on analyzing quantitative data. Because we collect heaps of data and we want to share it with young people, and we do this analysis. And let me say one more thing, Shruti. We started locally 5 years old. We have trained more than 10,000 undergraduate and postgraduate students of social sciences, because all our field work is done by students. We believe for social sciences, the lab is not within 4 walls. The lab is the wide world. We have taken our students out, given them prestigious certifications, which has allowed them to get fellowships for degrees in universities across the world. So psephology has very much become an academic discipline, and I encourage all of you to go to the website. We are one of the only groups who does public opinion surveys, and we publicize our methodology. Because we believe that if you have to trust us, you must also know the robustness of the methodology that we use. And therefore, we have pursued and again, Shruti, one more point. For us, psephology is not about predicting an election result, because that anyway you will come to know on the day the results are announced. For us, what is more important is not predicting a result, but it is analyzing why did a result come the way that it came. Why did a result emerge in the way that it did? To just give you one data point. How important was the Modi factor in the 2019 elections? You know what our survey tells us? 1/3 of those who voted for the BJP said, 1/3 of those who voted for the BJP said, we would not have voted for Mr. BJP if Mr. were not the prime ministerial candidate of the BJP. 1/3, which means 1 of every 3 votes that the BJP got in 2019 was because of the Modi factor. How are we able to say this with so much of conviction? We are able to say this because of the survey data that we collected, which no election result will tell. So Nandakishore, maybe I'll stop there. And I do hope your students have found this dialogue useful. I found it very useful. And I must compliment you and your students for the rigor with which you take such learnings and such knowledge.
Perhaps from the political science perspective, sir, this is the only paper that's available for them to venture into this side of the story of politics. That's called Indian Government and Politics. But anyway, one of my students had a question to you, which I'll probably forward. I know that you have a day-long sessions, one after the other, because of the Constitution Day. Now I would request our first-year student, Ms. Deborah Gomes, to come and deliver the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to deliver the vote of thanks to Vice Chancellor Professor Sandeep Shastri of Jharkhand University, Lake City University, Bhopal, India. Thank you, sir, for providing an insightful lecture on the status of democracy and the role of political parties in India. I am sure your perspectives on this topic has really influenced us. I would also like to extend my gratitude towards our head of department, Dr. Nandakishore, and staff members for organizing this interesting lecture as part of a Constitution Day celebration. And lastly, I would like to thank my fellow students for attending this lecture. Have a nice day and bon appetit.
Thank you, sir. Thank you once again on my behalf. We look forward to having you here to interact with us and probably speak a little more on psephology. I remember the days when Lokneet used to do pre-election surveys and then slowly moved out to the post-election surveys and then the outcomes. It will be very interesting to know the methodology and the way it is enumerated by the students. It will be a very good interaction. So we wish to have you here maybe in 2022. And thank you so much, sir. Take care.